Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Archana Solanki. Here are the headlines we're tracking this evening. Monetary Policy Committee maintains status quo for the 9th trade policy. Red flags risks over food inflation, saying one cannot be complacent. Maintains growth forecast at 7.2%. Governor downplays risks of a US recession. RBI Governor red flags risks over top-up home loans, also calls for a vigil on liquidity management, citing the scramble for bank deposits. Also adds household savings do not have too much exposure to equities. RBI moves to expedite the cheque clearance timeline from up to 2 working days to a few hours. Also directs lenders to provide credit reports every 2 weeks to strengthen the information ecosystem. Stock market slide after RBI's hawkish commentary. Sensex loses over 580 points. Nifty drops below 24,200. Rupee hits another record low against the dollar but remains on a tight leash. FMCG growth slows to 4% in the April to June quarter compared to a 6.6% growth rate in the January to March quarter. Data from Nielsen shows the slowdown is across rural and urban areas. Cash-strapped SpiceJet defaults on a 20 crore rupee payment to lessors. A frustrated Delhi High Court asked why the airline should not be grounded. Asked SpiceJet to make its directors personally liable for payments with disclosure of personal assets. An emotional Mohammad Yunus calls the students' protest a second freedom movement for Bangladesh after he lands in Dhaka. The Nobel laureate, who has been chosen to head the new interim government, said restoring law and order was a priority. Global airlines avoid the Iranian and Lebanese airspace amidst fears of an escalating conflict. 27 Palestinians allegedly killed in overnight Israeli raids, even as tensions simmer in the region. Wrestler Vinesh Phogat announces her retirement a day after her disqualification from the Paris Olympics, stripping her of an assured medal. The verdict from the Court of Arbitration on her appeal against the disqualification is awaited. The Monetary Policy Committee decided to maintain status quo as expected. This is the 9th trade policy when the MPC chose to hold fire. But once again, the decision was not unanimous, with 2 external members of the 6-member panel calling for a rate cut and a softening of the policy stance. So the repo rate remains at 6.5%. The stance remains unchanged at withdrawal of accommodation. All the 3 RBI members in the panel and external member Shashank Bhide voted for a status quo policy, but 2 other external members, Ashima Goyal and Jayant Verma, voted for a rate cut. Underlining that inflation remains a concern, RBI Governor warned that one should not be complacent about the fall in core inflation and cannot ignore food inflation. RBI maintained the 4.5% inflation forecast for this financial year but hiked its short-term forecast. The RBI also maintained its full-year growth forecast at 7.2%. Governor Das plays down fears of a US recession, saying it is premature to talk about a slowdown based on just 1 month's employment data.
Our target is the headline inflation, where food inflation has a weight of about 46%. With this high share of food in the consumption basket, food inflation pressures cannot be ignored. Further, public at large understands inflation more in terms of food inflation than the other components of headline inflation. Therefore, we cannot and should not become complacent merely because core inflation has fallen considerably.
You can give an idea whether you see any downward bias to our growth and inflation if things were indeed to turn out to be that the Fed has to do 5 cuts, if there is that kind of a slowdown.
So far as unemployment is concerned, it's a 1 month's data. Now, based on a 1 month data, you cannot assume that, you cannot rush to a conclusion about possibility of slowdown or possibility of a recession in, in a large and the largest economy in the world. So you have to wait and see the incoming data.
Right, Lata Venkatesh is here with more on the RBI policy. Lata, how did you read the policy and the statements from the governor?
Well, the market actually went into the policy fearing that there might be, or
hoping there might be a bit of dovishness because of the backdrop. You know, in the last 1 week, the Fed, which was expected to do 1 cut in September for 2024, is now expected to do 5 cuts in 2024. So there was an expectation or maybe a hope that perhaps the Reserve Bank would say something slightly dovish, but there was none of it. On the contrary, let me give you evidence why I think that you can call it hawkish. First, the inflation forecast for July-September, the current quarter, which is underway, was originally 3.8, that has been raised to 4.4. Even though, of course, the overall average has been kept at 4.5. Now, inflation for the first quarter of next year, that is April, May, June of 2025, or what you call FY26, that has been forecast at 4.4. Now, that's important because the previous quarter, that is Jan, Feb, March, the forecast is 4.3. This is 4.4. So the argument that inflation is even trending downward consistently cannot be made. The Reserve Bank likes to have these kinds of elbow room in case it doesn't want to cut rates. Also, this 4.4 is higher than the 4% forecast for the same quarter, which came in a previous MPR, that is the Monetary Policy Report, which the Reserve Bank puts out in April. So clearly, this looks like a little higher than expected. And finally, even the governor's explanation to my question on would you fear a global slowdown was that the US data still doesn't indicate conclusively that there is even a slowdown, forget recession. He pointed out, of course, that Q2 GDP in the US was 2.8%, hardly slow, and the unemployment number is riddled with some one-offs. And that's why I would think that, you know, the Reserve Bank chose to be a bit hawkish. My sense is they were also defending the rupee. The rupee is at all-time lows. It's a very gradual and, a shallow fall. But it is for the record all-time low. And maybe the Reserve Bank is just defending the currency from unwarranted short-selling attacks.
Right. Thank you, Lata, for that update. Meanwhile, the Reserve Bank also flagged concerns over top-up home loans. Governor Das asked lenders to monitor the end use of funds. He also added that the central bank is engaged with select entities to deal with the issue. Governor once again spoke about concerns regarding bank deposits moving towards riskier assets. He called for a vigil on liquidity management.
कुछ एंटिटीज में ये हम देख रहे हैं कि जो रेगुलेटरी रिक्वायरमेंट है टॉप अप लोन्स के बारे में उसको वो फॉलो नहीं कर रहे हैं. ये सिस्टम लेवल का प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. कुछ एंटिटीज में ये प्रॉब्लम्स आया है. उसको हम सुपरवाइजरी लेवल में बायलैटरली उन एंटिटीज के साथ डील कर रहे हैं. बट ये कोई सिस्टमिक प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. ये एक इशारा है, ये एक एडवाइस है बैंकों को कि आप इसको प्रोएक्टिवली मॉनिटरिंग करिए. मतलब उसका क्या एंड यूज क्या हो रहा है, एंड यूज मॉनिटरिंग करिए और उसमें आपका जो प्रूडेंशियल नॉर्म्स जो रिक्वायर रेगुलेशंस है उसको आपके डाउन द लाइन लोग फॉलो कर रहे हैं या नहीं. आई एम नॉट बाय एनी चांस सजेस्टिंग that people should more deposits in the banks, not go for equity market. It is left to the people to decide. It's left for the investor, it is left for the saver to decide where he wants to put the money. All that I am saying is that the banks need to focus on this, mindful of this, because potentially it can create some structural challenges with regard to liquidity management.
All right, Ritu Singh now joins us with the latest. Ritu, a red flag on top-up home loans and a slew of measures for consumers. Could you take us through the details?
That's right. You know, from bank deposits to personal loans, top-up home loans in the case of select entities, RBI has flagged several areas of risks for the financial sector that it sees, and the governor saying that banks are facing challenges on the funding front with bank deposits trailing loan growth, and they're taking greater recourse than before to short-term non-retail deposits and other instruments which could potentially expose them to structural liquidity risk. Now, asking banks to focus more on mobilization of savings through innovative products, through leveraging their bank branches and so on. He asked them to focus on this particular aspect. On personal loans, he added that some segments continue to see a very high growth rate, warning that excess leverage via retail loans, mostly taken for consumption, that needs some careful monitoring. In the case of top-up home loans, the governor said, without taking any names, that there are certain banks and NBFCs which were not strictly following the guidelines on the loan-to-value ratio, risk weights, monitoring the end user funds, and that, he said, may lead to that money being deployed for speculative non-creative purposes or unproductive purposes. Apart from these, of course, RBI also announced a whole bunch of measures that were focused on customer convenience, starting with a public registry for digital loan apps to help consumers to be able to identify the unauthorized and the illegal digital lending apps from the legitimate ones. He's also increased the frequency of reporting for credit information from monthly intervals to fortnightly basis or shorter intervals as agreed, because this will help customers benefit from a quicker updation of information, especially when they've already repaid the loans. The limit for tax payments done through UPI has also been raised. It was earlier 1 lakh rupees and now it is 5 lakh per transaction. And RBI has also introduced delegated payments through UPI, which essentially means that I, as a primary user, can allow a secondary user, let's say my mother, to make UPI transactions up to a certain limit without her actually having a secondary user, the secondary user, that is her, having a separate bank account which is linked to UPI. And lastly, there'll be faster clearing of checks. It was earlier T+1, now it'll be a few hours.
Right, thank you, Ritu, for that. Moving on to the markets now. Stock markets declined after RBI's hawkish commentary. Sensex lost over 580 points and the Nifty lost 180 points. The Nifty also fell below the 24,200 mark. Bank stocks managed to end in the green with minor gains. Mid-cap saw marginal cuts compared to the blue chips. The rupee hit another record low against the US dollar, but it remained within a tight range. The Indian currency is still below the 84 mark against the greenback. Developments in the Reliance Capital insolvency case. The National Company Law Tribunal has directed Hinduja Group's IIHL, the successful bidder for the cash-strapped company, to transfer 2,750 crore rupees into the lender's accounts within the next 48 hours. The tribunal also said that any interest accrued on the money in the accounts will belong to lenders. This ruling comes on the back of Reliance Capital Administration filing an affidavit accusing IIHL of contempt of court after it failed to comply with the tribunal's 23rd July order. In a relief for cash-strapped firm Byju's, the Delaware bankruptcy court in the US has rejected a request for blocking the company's settlement with India's cricket board, according to Byju's statement. Its American lender, the GLA's trust, approached the court asking for a restraining order which aimed at blocking the settlement BCCI. The EdTech also said that the US court ruling reinforced the validity of the settlement with BCCI. In the aviation space, a frustrated Delhi High Court asked SpiceJet why it should not be grounded after it defaulted on a 20 crore rupee payment to lessors. The court also questioned the airline why its directors should not be made personally liable for payments with disclosure of personal assets. Ashmit Kumar joins us now. Ashmit, what does this mean for the airline?
Well, a tough day in court as far as SpiceJet is concerned, defaulting on 20 crores of dues that they were required to pay as of today. Bear in mind that 31st of July, the Delhi High Court had directed the SpiceJet airline that they need to cough up these dues, 20 crore rupees in question, to essentially 2 engine lessors, which account for 4 engines that have been supplied to the airline. Now, as far as the lessors are concerned, they expressed their frustration, saying that despite the High Court directive, no money has come from the airline, that they've given vague assurances about payments coming in towards the end of September, that SpiceJet has even proposed giving equity in the company to the lessors on account of the dues that are payable to the lessors. However, the lessors clarifying their position that they are firmly rejecting any such proposal. No negotiations currently with SpiceJet for resolving this issue. As far as SpiceJet is concerned, they gave assurances to the High Court that they have not been able to pay. They accepted the fact that they are in default, but said that there is equity fund infusion likely in the company. By the middle of September, they'll have about 3,000 crore rupees with them. They'll use those funds for satisfying these lesser dues by the end of September. However, the High Court was not convinced. The High Court expressed its frustration, saying that despite repeated opportunities, we are yet to see the color of money. The High Court went on to observe that it is high time now. Negotiations, the time is over. It's time for the payments to be made. Asked a question of the airline as to how SpiceJet can continue to use those 4 engines in question without paying for them, that this is a question of principles, this is a question of equity here as far as lessors are concerned, and finally going on to also say that it is time now to consider the question of making directors personally liable. So to that end, the High Court has asked the airline time for over the weekend to consider these two proposals. Number one, is SpiceJet open to the idea of grounding these engines in question? Number two, are they open to paying this amount in question as of the next date of hearing? And importantly, also asking for a list of assets of the directors in question, asking are the directors willing to undertake this responsibility of discharging payment to the lessor? So a tough question being posed to the airline. They have limited time over the weekend. Next Monday is when this hearing will be resuming once again in the Delhi High Court.
Right. Thank you, Ashmit, for that update. On that note, we'll slip into a short break. Coming up next, an emotional Mohammad Yunus calls the students' protest a second freedom movement for Bangladesh after he lands in Dhaka. Details when we return. Welcome back. India's FMCG sector reported a sharp drop in overall volumes as per a report by Nielsen IQ. This was largely triggered by relaxed consumption patterns and macroeconomic headwinds. Shilpa Ranipeta joins us now. Shilpa, how did the sector fare in the first quarter?
Well, it's been a soft quarter for India's FMCG segment. The overall growth came in at about 4% in value for the first quarter. And this is much lower than the 6.6% growth that it saw in the previous quarter. Now, FMCG volumes also slowed down to about 3.8%. And this is down from about 6.5% in the past quarter. Now, rural outpaced urban for the second quarter in a row. But at the same time, it was lower at about 5.2% as against a 7.6% growth, while urban came in at about 2.8%, much lower than the nearly 6% growth that it had seen in the previous quarter. Now, like you said, Nielsen IQ has attributed this to a relaxed consumption patterns and that the deceleration in volumes is largely because of macroeconomic headwinds. Now, if you look at from a category point of view also, the consumption was largely impacted by the food segment. This is particularly your packaged salt, packaged atta, palm oil. These categories saw a slowdown. But what did well was summer-specific categories like soft drinks, packaged drinking water, prickly heat powder, glucose powder, etc. Now, non-foods, there was a downtrend in demand for personal care and home care categories in both urban and rural areas. In rural particularly, it was the high contributing categories like laundry, utensil cleansers, which witnessed slow consumption. Now, this slowdown has also resulted in a slowdown in traditional trade, which is your kirana stores, which grew just 3.1% as against a 5.6% growth in the past quarter. So it has been a soft quarter, but most of the FMCG majors which reported their earnings recently have indicated a positive outlook down the line. They do expect that volumes will pick up in the coming months, and their optimism is coming from the fact that monsoon has been progressing healthily, that there are some green shoots being seen in the rural areas, and also that the budgetary allocation in that direction will further boost rural demand. Back to you.
Right, thank you, Shilpa, for that update. India's GST enforcement officials have sought clarity from the Finance Ministry on whether fancy number plates on vehicles should be taxed at par with luxury items. Timsy Jaipuria is here with us. Timsy, tell us more about potential higher tax on fancy number plates.
Well, that's right. Possessing a fancy number plate, is that a luxury and should be taxed? That's the question that field formations have sought clarity from the North Block on the matter, and the formations are of a view that fancy number plates issued by state transport authorities are luxury and should be under the GST net. Not just this, sources say that in a recent case, the central GST authorities from Delhi zone issued a show-cause notice to Delhi government seeking GST dues on fancy number plates auctioned by the Transport Division. As per the communication sent by field formations to North Block, they say that state transport authorities sell fancy number plates via auctions. Some states have been collecting 18% GST on final auction price paid by the consumer and not discharging the same. There are cases where people bid for fancy or special numbers to be issued for vehicles at heavy premium. Tax officials feel that the premium payment is a luxury and should be taxed at 28%. States, on the other hand, are of a view that the number plates issued by them are exempt from GST. There have been instances where fancy number plates, remember, or the registration number of choice have got auctioned for over lakhs of rupees. In some cases, these number plates, such as single-digit numbers like 0007 or 0001, etc., have been auctioned for for over 20 to 30 lakh rupees too. So let's see how this proposal goes down the line. To be seen is how Delhi government replies to this show cause notice. Will Finance Ministry issue a clarity to the field formations to start taxing this luxury at 18% or 28%? We will have to wait and watch.
Right, thank you, Timsy, for that update. Shifting our focus to the big international update we're tracking. Nobel laureate Mohammad Yunus arrived in Dhaka today to lead the interim government that will oversee the affairs of Bangladesh after the downfall of Sheikh Hasina. The 84-year-old addressed the media after landing at Dhaka airport. He appeared emotional and took long pauses as he expressed his vision to rapidly advance the new Bangladesh. He extended his deepest gratitude to the youth of the country that made this victory possible. Meanwhile, back home, the External Affairs Ministry said that they will remain deeply concerned till law and order is restored in Bangladesh.
As far as we are concerned, Government of India and the people of India are concerned, for us, the interest of the people of Bangladesh is foremost. It is the responsibility of every government to ensure well-being of all its citizens. We hope for early restoration of law and order in Bangladesh. This is both in the interest of the country itself and for the region as a whole, or the larger region as a whole.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Business 360 News and Updates. Continue right here on CNBC TV 18.